Okay, so let's have introduction to inheritance. So inheritance is very important because this is one way of reusing. Can you hear me?
Yes, Miss.
Okay, so this is one feature that will allow us to reuse whatever classes that are considered already in place. So that is inheritance. So that is a mechanism that enables one class to inherit both the behavior and the attributes of another class. So this there is inheritance. So with inheritance, you apply your knowledge of a general category to more specific category. So the existing class will become a general class. And then if you have a specific class, simply allow that class to inherit the operations of the existing class. So this one can be called a parent and this one is a child. Yan. So inheritance, the very the type of diagram that is used for inheritance, especially for classes, is called class diagram. So this is one of the diagrams under the Unified Modeling Language. So this is a visual tool that will allow us to show classes without not really showing to you the entire program. So example of a class diagram, okay, this is an example of a class diagram. You have a class employee, and then the instance variables of the employee or the properties of the employee are the following. You have the ID, and you have the salary of type double. And then these are the methods of the employee class. So we have the get ID, which returned integer, get salary returns double, set ID returns nothing, and the set salary also returns nothing. So plus means these methods should be declared public. And if there is a price, kanang semi, what is this? A dash or a minus. So it means that these attributes or instance variables must be declared as private. So here in this diagram, the employee class there is another class named employee with territory, which is the subclass of the employee class. So na siya kanang arrow, no? Look at the arrow used if the relationship of two classes is inheritance. So you have there a line with an arrow. Now, an arrow going to the parent. So employee with territory is the child and the employee is the parent of the employee with territory. So simply, we can say that employee with territory is an employee. So the relationship is a. So for inheritance, the relationship is a. Whatever is the subclass or child that is considered as is a or is an is a parent. So meaning to say, diba, if we take a look at this, it means that the employee with territory is an employee. So one of the reasons why we are using inheritance is so that we don't need to recreate or we don't need to redeclare the necessary attributes or instance variables of the superclass. So example, for employee with territory, we also need the ID and the salary. So instead of redeclaring ID and salary in the employee with territory, we simply let employee with territory be the subclass of the employee class. With that, the employee with territory is able to inherit the ID and the salary of the employee, including the operations or methods of the employee class. So when to use inheritance. So these are the reasons why we are using inheritance, because it saves time. So instead of recreating from scratch or starting everything from scratch, you can reuse the existing classes, especially if these classes are already found in the Java API or application programming interface, meaning to say they are already sana, kanang we simply use them to be part of the solution na lang. So it saves time because you don't start from scratch. Likewise, because the classes are considered in place already, it reduces errors and it also reduces the amount of new learning required to use a new class. So if you, diba, if you have experienced it naman, it's not that easy to learn programming. When you are given a problem, you are not just depending on the instruction, on the learning you have you have learned or you have learned from your teacher, but at the same time you are probably also searching for other ways in order to solve the problem. So that is programming, and problem solving is really part of programming. So with that, with inheritance, it reduces the amount of new learning required to use a new class. So di na maglibog imuhang ulong halong saon kay ni siya because na may mga existing classes, and then you let your class na lang be the subclass of this existing classes. So these are the terminology in relation to inheritance. A while ago, I said I wrote their parent. The parent also is also called base class. So ang base class can be called parent. It can also be called super class and super class. So these are the other terms of the base class. You have super class and parent class. And then for the derived class, the other term for the derived class, we have subclass and we have child class. So for employee and employee with territory, the employee can be called the super class, parent, or the base class. And for the employee with territory, we can say that the employee territory is a derived class, a subclass, or a child class. So again, it is a relationship. So in inheritance, when you would like your class to be a subclass of a certain class, the keyword to be used is extends. For example, you have public class employee with territory extends employee. So by doing this, your employee with territory now inherits the operations, including the attributes. Okay, but they cannot directly access the private members now, but they can access them through the setters and the getters. So use the keyword extends. So inheritance is a one-way proposition. So with the relationship of employee, and employee with territory. So we have there the employee with territory. So with these two, the employee with territory is inheriting all the public members of the public, the protected, the package members of the employee class. Even the attributes are also inherited by the employee with territory. But the employee class, of course, cannot inherit anything from the employee with territory. So, may siya gitawag nga one-way proposition. Okay? So, just like the child, di ba? Sa human ba? If we talk about human, ang anak, kay maka-inherit siya sa mga properties ni parent. But the parent, lahi ganigid siya sa human, no? Because the children can actually give to the parents, but that is still not considered what? That is optional, di ba? That is optional. Not the children or a child is not really required by law. It is the child is not really required to give to the parent, di ba? Pero kay Pinoy man ta, because we care for people, especially for our parents, that is why we give, di ba? Pero it's optional. It's not required. But with regards to the properties, if you are a child of somebody who has lots of properties, you can inherit those properties owned by your parents. Human lang is not a single inheritance. It is what? By inheritance, because every human has two parents, and these are the the male, di ba? The male and the female. So you have the mama and the papa. Okay, so again, inheritance is a one-way proposition. A child inherits from a parent and not the other way around. And most of the time, we will be using the term subclass and superclass. So as we go along, you will notice that in every demonstration I'll be doing, and every time I speak of the parent and the child, so I usually use the term superclass for the parent and subclass for the child. And in order to determine also whether an object is an object of that particular class, we can use the operator instance of. Instance of is an operator. So, okay, this is an example. Mao ni siya ang employee with territory, no, that is extending the employee class. So here, the employee with territory has territory and the territory attribute. The methods get territory and the set territory. But aside from this, the employee with territory can also use the operations or methods of the employee class And then it can also inherit indirectly the instance variables of the employee class. So note that a subclass contains also data and methods defined in the original class. So matong gi-mention tanan nga mga naa sa superclass kay iyahasang naasad sa subclass. So sometimes superclass data fields and methods are not entirely appropriate for subclass operations. So there are cases no nga na inherit nimo siya from the parent pero it is not what you really wanted. So with that, the subclass can actually override. The term is override. The subclass can redefine the operation of the superclass. The operation of the superclass. So that is in relation. That is related to polymorphism. When we say polymorphism, the term is, diba, the word poly means many, and morphic is form. So it means many form. Polymorphism is one of the features of Java because there are really terms in Java or methods that has same name but has different operations or different implementations. Managitawag og polymorphism. So that will be showed to you once maabot na ta og abstract and interfaces. So when we say override the method, so you are creating a method in a child class that has the same name and parameter list as a method in its parent class. So kung nakabantay mo, if several times nagamit na ta og toString, toString actually is a method of the object class. So kani siya si toString, ang tag-iyaan niya kay si object class. Dayon, ang gibuhat ra gid ni toString kay mo display na siya sa address of a particular object. So makita na ninyo ang name sa class. Kung imuha ning tawagon nga di nimo i-override ang toString, ang mogawas kay class name followed by @ then hash code. Mo na siya mogawas. But if you override, when we say override, you copy the exact method heading of the method, same with the superclass. So example sa toString, mao man ni ang iyahang method, public string toString. So kung gusto ka nga ang imuhang class mo override ani, ingani gyud exactly ang imuhang buhaton nga method, public string toString gyud, pero imuhang butangan og bag-o nga definition dinhi sa iyahang body. Ano siya. So the ability of one method name to work appropriately for different subclasses of the same parent is called the subtype polymorphism. And naay mga times nga kanang ang imong pag-override no kay masayop gani ka gamay kayo nga sipyat lang ba. So di na din na siya ma-consider nga kanang method overriding. Wala na siya ni sapaw. Kung dili gani siya ka same og method heading sa superclass, dili na siya gitawag og overriding. So para ma-enforce gid nimo ang override override, meaning to say, ay sapaw ni siya sa parent ha. This method is actually owned by the parent and I am just redefining this. So, ang imong buhaton is mag-annotate ka. How to do the annotation, butangan mo siya og at followed by override. So, that is an annotation. What is an annotation? That is telling the compiler that you are overriding a parent class method. Okay, na may times usahay nga masipyat og gamay ang imuhang pag-override sa method. Again, sapaw na siya ha. You do overriding when an operation is defined already in the parent. So you are supposed to, your class is supposed to, yes, your class is able to inherit that, pero since dili man siya mo fit in sa subclass, gi-redefine siya, mo nang nag-override ka. So we have terms such as overloading and overriding here. When we say overriding, sapaw na siya. When we say overload, multiple methods with same name but with different, they're considered different signatures because they have different number and order of parameters. So when you instantiate an object that is a member of a subclass, you call at least two constructors. So bantayan na nimo no kay ang subclass ra ba ni tawag sana siya sa parent. Okay, mo ni siya ang iyang buti pasabot. Kung naghimo kuno kag object sa subclass, okay? Ang first nga nahitabo is Nicole sana siya sa constructor sa base class or superclass before sa iyang self. Okay? So example sa kadtong employee with territory, pag-create nimo og employee with territory, let's say E, niya employee with territory. So, pag himo nimo ana, mo ni siya tong object man. So, kani nga pagtawag niya sa constructor ni employee with territory, iya sa nang gitawag ang constructor ni employee class. Iya sang gitawag ang constructor ni employee class. So sa nahitabo, ano siya, the superclass constructor must execute first. When the superclass contains a default constructor, the execution of the superclass constructor is transparent. So here, this is an example. For example, natay a superclass, and then inside the constructor a superclass, you have in superclass constructor. And for the a subclass, you have there extends a superclass, and then inside the constructor of the a subclass, there is in subclass constructor. So in our main, you have here a subclass child, new subclass. Pag instantiate nimo sa a subclass, okay, we have this object no child. So ang execution ana niya kay mutawag sa na siya sa constructor ni superclass usa pa sa iyahang constructor. Why? Because there is an implicit statement here na ana siya nakabutang diri nga super. You don't see it but it's there. Itawag na siya implicit. Okay? So super, meaning to say it calls first the constructor of the superclass before performing the statements within that one. And by the way, kani siyang pag-call sa super or sa this inside the constructor should be at the beginning, not beginning but first line. Di ba body na siya niya no? So first line gina siya. Wala na siya nahitabo sa second or sa third line na gina siya sa first line. Kana pagtawag sa super or this. So by having the statement a subclass child new a subclass, man siya output. You have there in superclass constructor, then in subclass constructor, because again the constructor of the subclass is first performing the operations on the superclass constructor before performing its operations. So when you write your own constructor, you just replace the automatically supplied version. No? So kadtong butangan nimo siya og parameters. By doing that, when extending a superclass with constructors that require argument, so simply use the keyword super. So tawagon to nimo ang constructor sa superclass nga naay parameters. So ang imo lang gamiton kay super followed by the number of parameters. Okay, so you have there, call the superclass constructor, super followed by the list of arguments. So keyword super refers to the superclass. So ang gimini mo is you would like to call the constructor of the superclass, and then you are passing these arguments to that constructor. So this is an example also. So dili ni constructor ang iyang gitawag ha, pero kuha ni siya, method ni siya sa kanang customer, di ba? Ang dire, preferred constructor is the subclass of the customer class. So pag ingon niya public void display, and then inside you have here super.display. This is an example of di ba? Pag override man ni siya class because the method has same name with the method heading is the same with the method heading of the display in the customer class. So public void display. And then kung wala ni siya super, kung wala ni gibutangan og super, panalitan display lang no. Display lang, mag-recurse, mahitabo ang recursion. So the method will call itself. So magsige lang na siya call sa iyang self, display until such time mag-stack overflow, 'di ba? So kani pag niya super.display, ang iya actually gitawag is the display of the customer. So kung unsa to dito ang display ni customer, gitawag to niya and then gipun-an na lang og discount rate. Yeah, discount rate. Okay. Di ba ya okay nga magbalik na sad kag right sa statement. So imo na lang tawagon. Di ba? So to call the method which is the same with the subclass method, same man na sila. Imo ginang specify ang super nga keyword. Kung same sila. Pero kung walay method nga ingon ana si subclass, no need to write super. No need to write super kay imo man tumatawag ra diretso. Example kadto si set ID. Set ID for example, employee with territory to employee. So for example, si employee kay naa siya set ID nga method, matawag ra to diretso through the object of the employee with territory. Kay wala may set ID si employee with territory. Pero kung nahitabo nga naa sila'y set ID nga duha, dahil gusto nimo nga i-perform sa kantong sana ang imong tawagon is kantong method ni superclass man ang butangan nimo super. So think of the keyword this as the opposite of super within a subclass. So kung this, meaning to say you are calling the members of this object, the constructor of this object, the member of this object. And if you use the super, it means that you are calling the member of the superclass. So imo gid siyang gamiton ang super explicitly if si subclass kay naa siya same nga operation sa superclass. Again, if wala raman, you can just use the this. Kay ma-access man na dito sa subclass ang mga members ni mga non-private members of the parent or the superclass. So example, prehani, gimutag class student later. So the keyword private, with, di ba, kailangan i-encapsulate man na nato. So butang gina nato sila keyword nga private para dili sila ma-access diretso. So how other classes can access or can use the private members of a certain class, that should be through the setters and the getters. So very common nga ang mga methods imo gid nang i-declare as private, public, and then ang mga instance variables or katong mga attributes should be declared private. And make sure to provide setters and getters for this private instance variables or attributes. So with that, with private declaration, you are promoting what? Information. So that is the concept of keeping data private, and data can be altered only by methods you choose and only in ways that you can control. So that's the reason nga nang imong yung i-private, hindi mo siya i-diretso i-share. So that is to control the access to your instance variables, attributes, or data fields. Muna yung mga term nila, no? If I say instance variables, if I say attributes, and if I say data fields, they are just the same. So, this is encapsulating man, diba? This is encapsulation. You have the class student, and then you have two instance variables, the ID num and the GPA, and then you provided the setters and the getters. So the setters and the getters are declared public, sorry, and then the attributes or the instance variables are declared private. So this is promoting information hiding. So here, when a class serves as a superclass, the subclasses inherit all data and methods of the superclass, and then except private members of the parent class that are not accessible within a child's class method. So dili niya ma-inherit directly, but they are actually inherited indirectly, and they can be accessed again through setters and getters. So ito yung mga modifier or access specifiers or modifiers nga pwede natong gamiton. We have the package, the protected, the public, and the private. So pag ang imong gamit protected nga keyword, imong i-declare for example ang imong data fields nga protected mo ni siya. It provides an intermediate level of security between public and private access. Kung sa YouTube pa na siya, murag unlisted, okay? Can be used within its own class or in any classes extended from that class. And this cannot be used by outside classes. So pag na sila relationship, class and superclass and subclass, magamit sa kanang sa subclass ang mga operations nga naa sa superclass because protected man siya. Kung naasa sila na belong sa usa ka package, pwede sad gihapon. Okay? Pero kung outsider na sa package, dili na siya makagamit anang mga protected members. So, pwede na kung instead of declaring it private, sometimes we declare our data fields as protected. So, overriding is allowed, right? The subclass can override the methods of the superclass. Again, pwede kang mo redefine sa method ni superclass. But these are methods. These are the methods that cannot be overridden. And these are the static methods and the final methods. So if you don't want that a method can be overridden by a subclass, you have to declare it as final and or static. So kana, a subclass cannot override static methods in its superclass. Kana. And then a subclass can hide a static method in the superclass by declaring a static method with the same signature as the static method in the superclass. So pwede rin niyang ma-hide. Kung gusto nimo nga i-hide kadtong static nga method ni superclass, maghimo na lang pod ka og lain nga method nga ka-same ato, then static sad gihapon nimo. So then call the new static method from within the subclass or in another class by using a subclass object. Within the static method of a subclass, you cannot access the parent method using the super object. So kana mga super, kana mga these are only applicable for instance members. When we say instance members, kadto siyang mga methods o mga data fields nga walay word nga static. Muna sila pwedeng gamitan og this and super. So although a child class cannot inherit its parents' static methods, it can access its parents' static methods in the same way as any other class can. So how to do that? Class name that followed by the method. So example, baseball player is the superclass of the professional baseball player, but because the show origins was declared as static, so this is how you call show origins within the professional baseball player. You have their baseball player that show origins. Okay, another a subclass cannot override final methods in its superclass. So a subclass cannot override method declared final in the superclass. So by writing a final modifier, it does not allow the method to be overridden. So nasa yung mga virtual method calls, no? So these are defaults in Java, and they are determined when the program runs, and the object type might not be known until the method executes. So na yung mga virtual method calls. So what are the advantages to making the method final? Dili siya common, no? Pero if dili ka ganahan nga, override ang sa method and declare it as final. So if you declare your method final, the compiler knows only one version of the method exists. The compiler knows which method version will be used, and a program's performance can be optimized by removing calls to final method. Kana mo na siya. Kung di mo ipa-override ang method, then declare it final. And then, when a class is declared final, pwede sa gyapon nga ang class no, i-declare nimo siya nga final. When you are declaring a class as final, all of its methods are final regardless of which access modifier precedes the method name. So, dili pwede ma-override tanan. Therefore, because it is final, meaning to say that cannot be a parent class. Meaning to say single ra gina siya, mao ra gina siya ang class nga nag-exist. So this is an example, no? Your class which is declared final. So a subclass cannot override methods in a final superclass. Dili maka-override kay single raman na siya basta final. Okay, so let's have a demonstration on the inheritance part. So let's begin by having the person class. Mang-open to diri basig na anay person class diri. Type yes if you are still there. Ay, di mo ko type, no? Can you type? Or napa mo diha? Napa ko estudyante diha?
Yes, Miss.
Okay. Open din nato si person class. Okay. So example, we have already the class person, and these are the instance variables or data fields of the person class. We have the last name, the first name, and the gender. We have already these constructors. So the first constructor initializes the last name, the first name, and the gender. Second constructor is only initializing the last name and the first name. And the third one is empty. So nga nang butang gina natog empty kay, di ba, remember, kung naghimot ta og constructors nga naghimot ta kaugalingon na tong constructors, di ba, i-omit man to sa system ang kanang default nga constructor. So manang ato siyang ibalik, ato siyang i-explicit na lang, ato na lang i-write gyud. And then we have already the setters and the getters for the person class. We even have the display method, okay? So karon is maghimot ta og student nga class. So again, ang naa sa to ang person are the following kanang instance variables: last name, first name, and gender. Now, for example, maghimutag class student. A student is a person man, di ba? Meaning to say the student name, first name, and gender. So karon maghimutag student nga naay ID number o naay year level o naay course na lang sad. So let's assume that we will be creating a class student. So pang college ni siya ha. So let's have 3 more attributes. We have the ID number, the course, and the year. Nga na. So because student is a person, and because a student has last name, first name, and gender, so yung mga lang buhatan is to create a class student and let this class extends to person class. So if you are not specifying a package, make sure that these two classes are in the same folder. Pareha silang folder para magkita sila. So here, what are the attributes or the instance variables for students? First, let's have the ID number, then the course, and then the year level. And for the constructors, okay, so student, di ba? Ang constructor kay pareha man na siya pangalan sa class. So, unsa may mga posibleng ipasa nato sa student. So, last name, ito siya yung format sa person, last name, first name, gender. So, last name, then first name, then gender, unsa pa? Int, ID number. Unahon siguro na nato ang ID number sa Andre. Int, ID number. Yeah, gender, then string, course, then int, year, level. Ana. So, di ba, naa na may constructor si person nga nagdawat sa last name, first name, and gender. So, imo lang ang tawagon. So, ang pagtawagan na, gamit kag keyword nga super. Nya, pasa nimo ang last name, ang first name, ug ang gender. Sunod, ang sapay, wani mo na initialize. So, wapan mo na initialize ang ID number. So, ano nagamit tag this kay pariha og pangalan, ang parameter no kapariha sa instance variable. And then what else? Aside from the ID number, we have also the course and we have the year level. So, another, pwede maghimo lang tag constructor nga ID number lang, then last name, then first name. So, how to do this? Pwede na tamingog this, and then pasa na to si ID number, pasa na to si last name, pasa na to si first name. Wala sa gender. Unsa may default na gender nato? Let's say, may default na gender. M for example. And then, walay course. So, null ang course. Then, 0 ang year level. So, ang imong gitawag ani nga constructor is kaning first nga declared constructor ni student. Kani naman siya, super last name, first name, gender. Ang imong gitawag ani kay ang constructor ni person kaning. Ana. So, himo sa tag default. Okay. Dayon, maghimo din kag mga setters and getters. Set. Ito yung sunod, course. So, depende na kung depende sa unsay mga courses sa school. So, for example, dawaton lang nato bisag unsa nga course. So, that course. And then for year level, for example, up to 4 lang. So, check ka kung ang year level ba is greater than or equal to 1 and kung si year level ba is less than or equal to 4. So if it is, then you write there this that year level receives year level. Ana. What about for the getters? For the getters, let's have public int get ID num. Return ID number. Public string get course. And public string, no, but public int get year level. Return year. So, ana. So, mana to mga getters o setters. Tapos ang i-compile. Year level, identifier expected, ano? Private, okay. So, walay data type. Okay. So, sa person, naa na tayo display man diri, di ba niya? Instead, in fact, ato nang gihimuan og to string na lang. So, display siya first name, last name, and gender. So, kung atong gusto mahitabo is ID number first, followed by first name, last name, gender, then usa pa kadtong course and year level. So, this is how we override that to string here. So, public string to string. Pag di mo butangan og annotation, make sure lang yun nga sakto yun ang heading niya, kapareha yun sa superclass. So let's have it here, return. First kay ID number man to, no? So get ID number followed by space followed by super that to string. So we are calling that to string of the personal class now, followed by space followed by get course followed by year level. Get your level. Do maka-access ra gyud ni si toString sa kato mga year level course kay naara man ta sa class nga student. Pero it is okay gyud nga diri jud ka mo access kani mga setters and getters. So okay, sa ato nang i-test karon, maghimo na ta og objects ni student. So, last name, ano to? ID number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Followed by last name. Followed by first name. Followed by gender. Followed by course. Followed by year level. And then let's display. So kanina pagtawag na tog S1, nitawag man ni siya sa toString diretso because that toString is the string representation of an object. Okay, so you have there the student is ID number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, name Emily Villasaran, female, BSIT 4. Okay. So, pwede sa ka maghimo og student nga ang imong gamiton nga ang imong tawagan nga constructor kay ang empty. So with that, kung man ay unod si student no, kung man siya last name, first name, and so on and so forth. So atong ipang set. So set ID number, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And then iyahang last name. Diba? Ang set last name is owned by the person class. So let's say Kapuras. S2 dot set first name by the person still. Leia. S2 dot set gender. F. S2 dot set. Sapay kulang. Course. BN. S2 dot set year level. And then let's display. Okay, so that's it. Any question? So karon kana lang sa ako ang i-demonstrate ang relationship between the superclass and the subclass. And then for next meeting, I will be discussing the next chapter.